I grew up in a little small community of Smith Ridge, Louisiana. And as a matter of fact, my great-great-grandfather, Ben Smith, he gave that land to my grandfather and some other kids of his that he had. And they were able to settle that land, and mostly the Smiths owned that land, so they called it Smith Ridge. We did everything. We played basketball at the gym. We played football at the little park that they had. But believe it or not, swimming was a big thing. I mean, all these guys like to swim, and I became a lifeguard. Melvin and I were raised by our grandparents because my mother and my father, they were working all the time. And I just saw him, you know, he would just, when we would go work out, and he would just let me tag along. I was just a young kid, but I would see him and nobody could catch him. You know, he would be on the park and we would go play at Harris. Harris had a little bar and they had a baseball field behind it, but they would play football in the field. And I would just look at him just like going in and out of people and nobody could catch him. And I was like, man, I wish I could be like that. I wish I could do that, you know. So I played Bantam League for, it was the Little Caillou Hurricanes. Wayne Leday, I never forget, he would drive this yellow bus. He would take us to the games, and Wayne had me at all the positions. He had me at quarterback, defensive back, receiver, running back. When I got to Ellender, I was small. I just was so small, and I always teased my mom. I said, you had me too early, because I remember Coach Gene Simmons, and he told me one time, he said, if you were 1 year later, he said, man, because I was in the 9th grade, but I was smaller than all the other guys. I was so small at the time. Coach Marcello was like, you ever try wide receiver? And I never played receiver, you know, I played a little bit, you know, but not. And I was like, I was a running back. I want to be like maybe try receiver. And he knew my size. Coach Marcello was just brilliant. He could look at you and make adjustments. So I moved to wide receiver. In our JV year, I led the team in receptions, and Clarence Verdun led the team in rushing. We played in the spring game. I had a nice spring game, had some catches and everything. And then right before the season, got my grades back, and I didn't pass a couple of classes, and I know Spanish was one of them. And really, you know, I know if I studied hard and worked hard, my mother was a teacher, and, you know, she would have helped push me and everything. But for that one moment, I just, you know, I took everything for granted. You know, I took my studies for granted. And I'll tell every young kid out there, whatever you do, you know, always put yourself in a position to be successful in your schoolwork. That's the key, because that'll take you a lot farther than actually trying to make a professional team in basketball, football, or anything else, or even make the college squad in any of these sports. That I didn't do, and I regretted it for a long time. Now, when I got the Southeastern track scholarship, my mind was playing football. So I walked on the football team for the JV team. We played against Nichols and LSU and had a bunch of catches and some touchdowns. Coach Lofton came to me and said, look, I'm switching you from track to football. And that's how I got the football scholarship at Southeastern. I didn't play a lot my freshman year, living on special teams. And my sophomore year was pretty much the same. But I knew my junior year I was going to. And had a big 300-pound guy that fell on my ankle and broke my ankle. I had to sit out that whole year. And I was just so depressed. I was so depressed. It was just like one thing happening after another, you know, from the high school up to the track, and then I get there and I break my ankle. So I actually came home. I said I wasn't going back to school. Should I have the operation? My brother died on the operating table, and Dr. Luke said, if you don't have the operation, you're going to walk with a limp for the rest of your life. You got to have it. So once I got it, I came home, and I just sulked for a while. I sulked for about a year, and my dad said, look, brother, you going to work for somebody or you going back to school? And he said, your brother wouldn't want to see you like this, you know? He said, it's just time to grow up, Troy. Finally, I drove up to Southern, and I met with the coaches, and I said, you know, I want to get back in school. And I told them about the injury and everything else. So they were like, okay, you can walk on. And I'll never forget, I got a call from my good friend, Clarence Verdun. He's with the Houston Gamblers. He said, hey man, Miles Davis is going to Southern to work out some guys. They're going to be going all through the South. And I told him about you, and he want to work you out. I said, Clarence, man, I think I'm going to play my senior year. I need to get some stats built up. You know, and he was like, but he's coming down, and I told him about you, man. So I said, okay. So he called the coach, and the coach called me. He said, listen, I got to fly into New Orleans. I got to go to Tulane and a couple other schools. He said, can you meet me at the airport? June Jones. I said, sure. He said, pick me up from the airport. We're going to find a nearest stadium, and I'm going to go work you out at the stadium. Well, June played quarterback in the pros at one time. So I picked him up at the, I had a sign, June Jones, at the airport. I'll never forget. And I picked him up, and we went work out at Bonneville School. So he said, I want you to run me some in routes, out route. And I ran all the routes. I caught everything. I mean, I caught everything he threw. And he was like, okay, man. He said, I want you to run me a 40. So I ran a 40, and it was wet. The mud was sloppy. I ran a 4.38 that morning. And he was like, dude, he was like, where you been, man? I said, it's been a rough road. He said, look, I got a contract right here, man. I said, I can sign it? He's like, yeah, you don't need an agent or nothing. And we signed it on the hood of my car. $30,000, USFL. And I signed it, and I went home, and I said, I just made the USFL. I signed with the USFL. I said, I got to go to training camp, and they're bringing in a lot of guys. I said, but Daddy said, you're not going back to play for your senior year? I thought that's what you wanted to do. And I said, nah. I said, what if I get hurt? Or what if something happens? All the luck I've been going through. And the first 2 days of practice, I stunk. Couldn't run a route, slipping, falling, couldn't do nothing right. I called my dad and said, man, I don't know. I said, these guys are pretty good. He said, so you're telling me you don't believe in yourself now? All that you've been through. I said, well, no, I'm not saying that. He said, man, don't call my phone with that. And that's what I needed to hear. He said, I'll talk to you later. I didn't need to hear, well, Troy, you can just try and give it your best. Or Troy, you can, no, my dad was like, I don't want to hear that. Strongest man I ever seen in my life. Didn't cry for his son's death, never saw the man shed a tear. That's a strong man. And he told me he didn't want to hear it. Hung up the phone. Went back out to practice the next day. One bomb after another. And when they got to the countdown, I made the team. Once the league folded, I really didn't have any offers. But a friend of mine who I played with, Lonnie Turner, he had an agent by the name of Harold Lewis. And he said, man, Harold saw you playing. He said, you were just a rookie. You got some catches and everything. He saw you on special teams. He said he would like to represent you because he's starting an agency. So the first team I went to, Dallas Cowboys. They loaded. They got Tony Hill. They had Dorsett then. They had a couple of receivers, Carl Poe. I mean, they were loaded. But I did have a good camp when I went to Dallas. I think it was the second to the last cut they released me. But I had a little film. So he called me back and he said, St. Louis Cardinals want to work you out. So I went to St. Louis and I had a good workout. And so my agent called me and he said, what you doing? I said, nothing, packing. He said, sit down. It's like they're keeping you, brother. And that's how I made the Cardinals team. When I'm walking through the tunnel, when I just had made the team and I went back over and walking through the tunnel, I see this guy coming towards me. And I look and he says, hey man, what's up? And I said, hey. And he said, JT Smith. And I said, hey man, and we hugged. JT Smith was with my brother in Kansas City. He came down to Smithridge and did his eulogy when I was a 17-year-old high school kid. I was 17. He was getting closer to 30 now. So when I walked to that tunnel and I saw him, and he said, you made it, huh? And I said, man, I made it. And he hugged me. And man, that was like emotion, man. Just seeing him at 17, I'm in high school, and here's the same guy I'm playing with that my brother was with in Kansas City. I was the 5th receiver, and they had drafted a guy, Eric Swanson from Tennessee, and Chaz Fox was from Furman. One was in the 3rd round, and one was in the 5th round. And so we're competing. And the next thing I know, look at the depth chart, I'm number 4. We competing. And I'm looking at the depth chart, I'm number 3 now. Finally, when I got that first catch in my belt in an NFL game, once I got that first catch, I was like, you know what? I think I can play, When I first got there, Roy Green was giving me a lot of trouble. He was like, I'd run a route, and he was like, hey, man, go back to Southern with that route. We don't run this in the NFL. Boy, he was cocky. And he was getting on me, and I'm like, JT, this guy don't like. He said, man, that guy, he likes you. He said he's just talking to make you better. I said, he likes me? He said, yeah, but he's just going, that's Roy. Roy's going to do that, all pro, And as time went on, him and JT took me under their wing. Man, Roy and I became great friends.
Catch is good by Troy Johnson. He's a rookie who's making progress. That's another first down.
To the 8-yard line. Nice move by Johnson in for the touchdown. Troy Johnson, who has blazing speed, has run a couple of...
My first year I only made $55,000. So my third year I was going in. I was only asking for 75. And, it got a little contentious. I said, I'm not coming to camp. You got to give me 75. You got to give me that. I'm playing now. I'm a third down guy. I'm playing. And I led the team. I didn't have a bunch of catches, but I led the team to yards per average per catch a couple of years. And they said, no, we're not going to pay that. When I did, get on the field doing the preseasons and whatever, it just wasn't the same. And they ended up releasing me. And it was a week or so later, I was picked up by Pittsburgh. Great organization. Chuck Noll is probably the greatest coach I ever played for. Very hard, very tough, but very fair. It was Ouija Thompson and Lewis Lips and Charles Lockett. So Ouija got hurt, so it was Charles Lockett and Lewis Lips, and then I started alternating with Charles Lockett on the first team. When we finished that season, I went in, because I only had a one-year contract, and I went in, I'll never forget, and I asked for $100,000. And Garden, I'll never forget, his name was Garden. He said, we're not giving you that. He actually got in my face. He was yelling and spitting in my face. Just take it and stop asking for that. Well, what upset me the most, they brought in a guy, Tracy Porter from the Jets. And they brought in another guy, Jason Johnson from the Broncos. Neither one of these guys had a catch. They did not have an NFL catch. And they were paying them more than me. I said, how can you pay them more than me? They don't have any catches. And he was like, well, that's plan B. The NFLPA wanted plan B. We have nothing to do with that. I was like, but still. And once again, it got bad, but I take all of the blame because I just should have played. And it would have came later. And I just wasn't patient. Went to Detroit. Mouse Davis was there. And played like 9 games. Ended up blowing out my hamstring. And they later released me after I blew out my hamstring. A good friend of mine by the name of Ken Winey. He was playing with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So he called me one day out the blue, and Coach Mike Riley's on the phone. And he said, hey, you still got something in the tank? And I said, I don't know, Coach. I said, I don't know, maybe. He said, well, if you do, you got a place up here. If I would have started in Canada and then graduated to the NFL, I probably could have appreciated more. But coming from the NFL and then going to Canada, it was a little different. In Canada, the money wasn't there like the NFL. So you had to buy your shoes and you had to buy your gloves. It was just a little different, but the fans loved it. And after that, I pulled my hamstring, and I was pushing 30, 31. And I said, you know what? That's about it. It's enough now. It's time. Frank Lewis, just talking to him, making calls to him. I mean, Frank was just so gracious, and like I said, I think Frank is one of the best receivers I've ever seen. I mean, the guy just can run routes and catch the ball, and he would always say, stick to it, and this is what you got to do. And boy, Frank is just a great guy. But Frank Lewis was a guy I can call, I can count on, just, really good guy that took all of us, Clarence and all of us under his wing. My biggest regret was not being patient. And I've learned a lot about not being patient. Everything's not going to be fair in the world. It's just how it is. But you don't have to go to extremes when they're not fair. Sometimes you just got to fold 10 and say, hey, man, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go with it, and this is what it is. And I regretted that for a long time, learned a lot. And I tell my kids today, you got to be patient. And it's not going to be fair all the time. It doesn't matter if it's not fair. You can only control what you can control.